Bristol Bay is far away from large cities and centers of commerce, located on southwest Alaska on the Bering Sea side of the Aleutian Peninsula. Of course, it is primarily known for having the largest annual sockeye salmon run in the world. The run hits 5 rivers in the region: the Nishigak, Kvichak, Naknek, Igigik, and Ugashik rivers. The sockeye season starts toward the end of June and is basically over by the end of July. Fur-bearing animals such as fox, otter, mink, marten, wolf, wolverine, and beaver have been plentiful in Bristol Bay. Many residents who fished commercially also went upriver to trap each year, starting as early as September or October and working through April or even May, if conditions permitted. Although Bristol Bay's short summer is generally mild and somewhat warm, its long winter months come with Arctic weather of temperatures well below zero and 100-mile-an-hour blizzards. This film was shot in Naknek in 1938, a year when both fishing and hunting season were good ones. Nornik Cannery is the primary location. Nornik is actually a nickname that caught on when Northwestern Fisheries Company built the cannery around 1920. The name Nornik stuck, and it is still called that today, though it's been through many different owners. Since the beginning of the Bristol Bay fishery in the late 19th century until 1951, well over 95% of the harvest was caught by double-ender sailing vessels. These boats were very seaworthy but comparatively small next to today's fleet. They were also lacking any comforts, including engine power, hydraulics, water tank, and shelter from the weather. The sail fleet, or drift net fleet, started fishing early Monday and fished 6 days through Saturday without going ashore. Whatever food they ate had to be cooked on a small gas stove, so their food intake was minimal, and whatever sleep time they got was under a small 6-foot tent in the bow, only when time permitted. A small percentage of the bay harvest was accomplished by set net. Set netters, of which there were only 40 in the Naknek River in 1938. They used the same types of gill nets as the sail fleet did, but were limited to 50 fathoms of length as opposed to 150 allowed by the drifters. Set nets were attached to shore and anchored at the seaward end. A skiff with an outboard motor was used by 2 crew to maneuver along the net and pick out the fish. The sailboats, supplied to the fishermen by the cannery, made drift sets, with just the captain and boat puller sailed to a particular set or location in the river. They paid out the gill net, 150 fathoms, and drifted with the tide as salmon swam into the net and were caught by the gills in the web. If fishing was real good, a given drift might last up to 3 hours, wherein upwards of 2,000 fish could be caught. Of course, time was always of the essence, so the drift fishermen had to seek the best possible set for any given tide. At the end of the set, the 150 fathoms of net was pulled in by hand and stacked with the fish in it in the bottom of the boat. After getting the whole net aboard, the 2 crew would then backhaul the net and pick out the salmon. Obviously, this was a labor-intensive job, especially with the pressure of time, given such a short season. But during a good season, a top sailboat could catch up to 40,000 sockeye, or approximately 240,000 pounds, during a single season. Tides in Bristol Bay are huge, sometimes running as fast as 6 or 7 knots. In order to deliver their catch, the drift boats often had to sail against these tides as well as seas and wind. Even though summer weather is generally mild in Bristol Bay, there could be winds up to 40 knots or more during the odd storm. So the sail fleet, having no power other than sail and oar, constantly battled the elements. Obviously, this work was not for the faint of heart. These double-ended sailboats made up most of the fleet from the late 19th century through 1951. Approximately 1,000 sailboats fished in the Naknek River in 1938. Some powerboats came to Bristol Bay in 1922 and 23, but the processors, or canneries, saw powerboats as a threat to their control over the industry, so the canneries lobbied for a regulation mandating that only sailboats be used in Bristol Bay after 1923. With enactment of this regulation, sail remained the method of harvesting in Bristol Bay until 1951, when the powerboat ban was lifted. Although sailboats seem primitive, the fact remains that a highline fisherman could catch as many salmon as a highliner in today's Bristol Bay fishery. When the runs and prices were good, fishermen made very good money. Over more than a century, the size of the salmon harvest in Bristol Bay has fluctuated, but the overall average per season has been well over 15 million salmon. From 1933 to 1938, with the exception of 1935, the yearly Bristol Bay sockeye harvests exceeded 20 million fish. Set netters, as you can see, worked very hard. They did have the benefit of a standard 9-horsepower Johnson outboard to maneuver along their 50 fathoms of net. The process of picking the fish was nearly as arduous for them as for the drifters, and during good fishing, their shorter net filled faster. One good set could yield 1,000 to 1,200 fish, which would pretty much fill up one of their set net skiffs. So timing and efficiency reigned supreme while food and sleep remained secondary. Some subtle yet meaningful differences exist between working the two different types of gear. First, the set netter had the advantage of using engine power, even though it was a 9-horsepower outboard engine during 1938, and they had their net anchored at each end and the luxury of regular food and sleep ashore in a cabin or tent. Furthermore, the set netter could pick the fish as the net was hauled over the skiff and returned to the river. This provided two main advantages over drift boats. First, the set netter was able to pick the fish at the same time that he hauled it, and second, the net was fished all the time, as it never left the water. These advantages amounted to a more time-efficient and somewhat less laborious means of harvesting the salmon. But the disadvantage was in the fact that the set netter could not move his gear to the heavy fishing, but was stuck with a designated site that was the same every day throughout the season. Back in 1938, when this whale was caught, no Mammal Protection Acts or subsistence quotas existed. However, that doesn't mean that catching belugas was commonplace. As a matter of fact, it was quite rare in Naknek. The man in the foreground is Harold Backman, and John Meggitt is the person with the 8mm movie camera. This scene was shot at the Nornik Cannery oil dock, and you can see the carpenter shop in the background. Many Naknek residents ate both the blubber, called muktuk, and the meat, which was distributed around town to those who wanted it. Belugas could grow up to 3,000 pounds and yield a considerable amount of food and bone that the peoples of Alaska still use. It is still a food source that the Inuits rely on for their diet. 3 native villages in northwest region of Alaska still hunt belugas on a yearly basis, so long as the Beluga Whale Council allows it. The beluga remains a vital part of Inuit culture today and is hunted at Point Lay, Point Hope, and Barrow, among other villages.